This could be a long week. Fred Katz here on ClipperBlog Live, following the Clippers' 125-118 loss in San Antonio. This starts off a heck of a stretch for the Clips. Spurs tonight, Hawks Tuesday, Warriors on Christmas, Raptors Saturday. Clippers started 0-1 and fall to 19-9 on the season after tonight's loss. Joining me tonight from Los Angeles, the almost birthday boy, Patrick James.
Woo! I'm glad this wasn't a birthday present.
Yeah, it's a terrible birthday present. That's Patrick. That's how you know you're getting old. The birthday presents are starting to become insults.
Yeah. You know what was insulting tonight? The Clipper defense.
Oh man, let's get to that in 1 second, because I'm going to ask you a positive form of a question which might elicit that answer, which is the Spurs offense is I think we'd all agree is pretty good. We know the Clippers defense was not particularly good tonight. Was tonight about the Spurs offense though? Like how well did they really move the ball in getting to 125 points and shooting? I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's hard to get to. I have it called up here: 64% from the field and 13 of 23 on threes.
Yeah, 13 of 23 is really impressive. I mean, it just kind of seems like they don't miss open threes against the Clippers. And it's never really a great strategy to hope your opponent misses open threes when their whole offense is generated around ball movement and getting you to rotate until an open shot develops. The Spurs are just so good at that. Even on a broken play, they find a way to get the ball to the open guy for the best look possible. Like, there was that play that was just kind of going nowhere, and then the Clippers kind of collapsed on Manu, and like the ball got knocked free, and then Manu did the over-the-head pass to the corner. Did Kyle Anderson catch that? Who shot that three? Danny Green?
That was Danny Green, and that pass was nuts. And that was arguably not even the best pass of the game.
No, but it was just an example of Manu knew where Green was, and he was kind of like off balance or whatever, but he just made the quick little like over-the-shoulder pass, and Green was there, and he got an open shot, and he was almost creating space, Manu was, by making the pass, because he's like effectively screening any defender from getting to him who's on the baseline.
It's the same effect as a dribble handoff. Yeah,
it's like a dribble handoff, except like the defender is not moving with you in the same direction that the guy who's going to get the ball is. It's like a superior dribble handoff because of the element of surprise.
Manu is really the only guy in the league who, if you told me, executed a no-look, backwards dribble handoff in the corner, I'd be like, yeah, okay. I feel that totally could happen.
There were a lot of plays where it's like the Clippers they did their strong side kind of pick and roll defense, right? Where they like really the power forward or Blake or DeAndre, whoever, switches hard and shows hard on the ball and pick and roll, and then they pass out of that. And the Clippers were there for that rotation, that first rotation. They were there a lot of the time. The problem is San Antonio will make another pass or another pass after that, and the Clippers were just never there for those third and fourth ones. Like maybe a little bit for the third pass, but the fourth pass was just like an open three or one of those threes that's like contested in the sense that there's a guy with his hands up jumping at it, but the shooter has already released before the defender has reached the apex of his jump. So it's like it looks like a contest, but it's not a contest. It's an open shot, you know?
Yeah, I mean, helping the helper is a phrase you hear in basketball all the time, and it's something the Clippers were not good at tonight. They've had issues with that in the past this season, and they were especially bad at it tonight. And you know what? The Spurs are also probably the best team in the league at exploiting a team that's not good at helping the helper, because they will make quick, decisive passes to find the open man or find the guy who's going to find the open man. They're probably the best secondary assist team in the league. I don't know what the numbers say on that, but just schematically, their schemes, their offense, the way they pass calls for them to. They find guys who find open guys so often. I think they had 37 assists tonight, which is just bonkers. Like they are such an incredible passing team. Everyone on that team passes from the bigs. Like people talk about Diao as a passer, or Ginobili, or even Duncan and Parker as passers. But even Tiago Splitter is a heck of a passer. I mean, everyone on this team understands how to find open guys, how to find open cutters. It's pretty amazing to watch them. That's something that you get when you bring back basically an entire roster after winning a championship too. Guys just know each other's tendencies. They're obviously the best coach team in the league. I don't think anybody's ever said anything other than that over the last probably 10 years. They're really, or I should say since Phil left the Lakers, but they're pretty amazing at finding those guys. And the problems with the Clippers is so offense is basically just about the simplest form of offense is you want to make sure you take good shots. It's not necessarily about making shots. It's about taking good shots. So if you're taking open shots, you're taking threes, you're taking shots close to the rim, then you're probably going to win more games than you lose as long as you deter the defense from taking good shots on the other end. That's basketball in its simplest form. It's also about creating mismatches. And the Spurs are so good at creating mismatches. And the problem is that when the Spurs run the pick and roll, say, and the Clippers have two big men go follow the ball handler, and then they don't help, all of a sudden you've got two big men beyond the three-point line and one Spur beyond the three-point line. So the Spurs all of a sudden have that mini 4 and 3. They've created a mismatch. And that's when they capitalize. And the problem is, if you get one guy to cover on the roll man, often, Diao or Duncan or whomever, and you do it quickly, then those two Clippers who are now beyond the three-point line can come back and they can recover and they can be okay. But the Clippers don't communicate, and they come back on the wrong guys, and somebody ends up getting open. And the Spurs exploit that every time, and it's very, very it's hard to watch.
Look, they also do the thing where when they get the two bigs out there, one of the bigs is playing fake defense. Like there was a time when Griffin, showed hard on Tony Parker, and he had his hands down. And then he kind of casually started walking back to his man, his man before the switch, before Parker had made a move one way or the other. And so Parker just shoots an open shot with Griffin kind of standing in between two guys with his hands down. And it's like, what's the point of showing really hard like that if you're not going to do anything to disrupt what the ball handler is doing?
Yeah, it's
that doesn't even take into account the fact that the Spurs will just beat you eventually with the little mismatch and then the ball movement that you were alluding to. It's just like, what's even the point of doing that if you're not going to defend?
Yeah, it's something the Clippers have to consider. I know this is how they defended the pick and roll for a while, and the Spurs are a pick and roll heavy team which run it unbelievably. So, but the problem is this isn't a one game issue. This is something they've been having all year. They're not the 17th in points allowed per possession right now. That's not a championship team. I mean, no team in the last, I think, since 1974, two teams have finished outside the top 10 in points allowed per possession and won a championship, and that was the 95 Rockets and the 01 Lakers. Both of those teams were repeat champions who notoriously coasted through the regular season and then turned it on in the playoffs. So that can kind of explain why the Rockets, who had Hakeem, fell out in 95 and then just went nuts when they won like 47 games or whatever in the playoffs. And the Lakers, that was the team that went 16-1 in the playoffs, and they just decided we're going to go crazy. I think they were 21st in defense that year. Yeah. So it's you basically need a top 10 defense if you want to consider yourself a championship contender. And the Clippers are nowhere near that right now.
No, they're not. I mean, they have DeAndre Jordan, and they have a little bit of Matt Barnes, and they have, individual plays by Chris Paul on defense. But, I mean, the Clippers got shredded tonight every way imaginable. Like, Tony Parker, just annihilated Chris Paul, who's like ostensibly the Clippers' best perimeter defender. They got 23 points out of Boris Diaw. The Clippers just don't. They need help on defense. They need help. You mentioned inability to help the helper. they need a new helper to come from somewhere to come in. And I don't know whether that's strategy or personnel, but like there's something here, or there's something missing here.
Well, we're gonna have a conversation about personnel a little bit later. First, I'm gonna ask you, who's your player of the game from tonight?
I mean, Parker was everywhere. Duncan, I think it's Tim Duncan, although Boris Diaw would be a close second. Boris Diaw seemed to be more the recipient of a lot of stuff. Seeing Duncan play this way, going for 21 and 12, and just looking so confident when it's been noted he can barely straighten his leg when he's walking around. I think before the game, Popovich was saying something like, "Have you seen him walk? I think it's amazing he can play at all." He looks so good. He looks so good.
It's crazy how good he is. Like, it legitimately bothers me when people say, it's amazing that Tim Duncan is 38 and he's still a contributor on a championship team. Contributor? He's not a contributor. Everyone talks about how he turned over the team to Tony Parker. Tony Parker is the team's best player, and yada, yada, yada. Maybe he turned over the offense to Tony Parker.
Yeah.
He did not turn over the team to Tony Parker because Tim Duncan runs that defense. He is so good, especially with Kawhi out. I mean, he is still. If you want to classify him as a center or power forward, I think he's either top 5 in both of those positions, however you want to classify him. He's still a top 5 player at his position in the league, and 38 years old, being able to contribute on both sides of the ball, rebounding, still being. He might be the most active screen setter in the NBA. It's amazing. He can not touch the ball for possessions on San Antonio and be their most important offensive player on that possession because they'll set 2 or 3 screens, which will totally open up the play, which average players aren't able to set. And it's just he's amazing, man. You just got to appreciate what you watch. I mean, I think he's the best player of his generation. I think he's the best player of my lifetime that I've seen because I caught the tail end of Jordan when I was like 8. But, I saw Jordan Wizards, but that was really it. And like, he's the best player that I've seen in my basketball watching lifetime. It's incredible how good he is.
Yeah, I mean, he was great when he came into the league, and he's great now.
21 and 12 as a rookie.
He was great when he entered the league, and he's still great now. It's like. And the Spurs have been the best team the whole time that he's been in the league.
Yeah. So let's get away from the Tim Duncan gush party, because I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who disagrees with the things we just said about Tim Duncan.
You don't live in Los Angeles, my friend.
Yeah, I guess probably a lot of people would say Kobe. I'm probably in the minority saying Duncan's had a better career than Kobe, but whatever. That's
well, we can save that for the drive time sports radio hour of ClipperBlog later when we yell at each other about how you don't understand what it takes to be a star. It's just Duncan's impressive.
Yes, he's very impressive. I think we can all agree on that. But how do we feel? The Clippers, I mentioned at the start of the show, this crazy road trip. The Clippers had San Antonio tonight. They're at Atlanta tomorrow. Then they're home for Golden State, which is hardly coming home. And then they have Toronto. Toronto and Golden State each have the best record in their respective conferences. So how do we feel about the team heading on this road trip after tonight's loss?
Well, the encouraging thing is that Golden State will likely be without Andrew Bogut. And Toronto will be without DeMar DeRozan, probably. What's not encouraging is that San Antonio was without Kawhi Leonard tonight, and that didn't seem to help anything. Patty Mills, too. Look, the Clippers are a team that is fantastic offensively and has a lot of talent in the starting lineup. And they have huge holes throughout the roster. They're playing a bunch of teams that are very consistent and well coached, and firing on all cylinders. And certainly with Toronto and Golden State are extraordinary defensive teams. And that's been, I think, the thing with this team, the Clippers, that's frustrating for fans to watch is you can have a bad night if you're a good defensive team, and you can get a win. The Clippers can't do that. They just don't have the personnel, or they don't have the scheme, or something's missing. So looking at the rest of this trip against these teams that just seem like, can that team grind out an ugly win? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the Hawks can. Yeah, the Raptors can. Yeah, the Warriors can. They also can just shoot hot fire. Budenholzer's coach, that offense is very Spursian, which could be a huge problem for the Clippers. So I look at all three of these games and I'm like, it'd be cool if the Clippers won. I don't know how they're gonna do it, but it's not impossible. It just doesn't seem likely either. And certainly after tonight, it seems a little bit less likely that they're gonna have a good showing the rest of these 3 games.
We've been pretty negative on the Clippers right now. They're still 19-9. They still, a reasonable person could say, they just went to the defending champion San Antonio Spurs place and played them down to the last minute. Why you guys ripping the Clippers? They were supposed to lose this game because it's a road game against San Antonio where no one is favored, and they played them really close. So what's a positive from the Clippers night? Why were they able to keep it so close?
I think you have to be at least a little bit impressed with the bench's play to close out the third quarter and to start the fourth. I generally am not a big fan of this bench, but Jordan Farmar played his butt off. He grabbed a couple rebounds where he, in traffic, he made shots Jordan Farmar coming off a screen and catching the ball and taking one dribble and shooting an open 16-footer. I know that's not the most efficient shot in basketball, but that's his game, and it looks good when he does it. Yes, catch and shoot, or catch and take one dribble in rhythm, and play with that confidence. I like that. I liked, the way Glenn Davis was playing. He was actually disrupting things defensively, and he was, rolling hard to the hoop on offense after setting screens. I think those things are encouraging because it says that even though this bench is, often going to be undermanned against teams with kind of a little bit more ideal personnel, they still play with, a sense that they can win. And I think that was kind of encouraging tonight. I would not have expected that the bench was going to be the guys that got the team back into this game.
Yeah. I think on top of that, the offense just looked good.
Yeah.
Blake had a good offensive game. Chris Paul had a good offensive game. JJ Redick might have, slowed down the second half, but had a tremendous first quarter. Pop called a timeout 53 seconds into the game because Redick hit a 3 on the Clippers for the Clippers' first basket. Pretty sure it was because the Clippers basically run a pin down or a flare screen for Redick to start pretty much every single game, and I'm sure Pop told his team that, and then he was still wide open, and Pop probably got pretty pissed and called a timeout, which I love. He calls the quickest timeouts of any coach in the league. But the defense was what brought him down. But the offense looked very good. 50% from the field, 42 from 3 on 10 of 24 from beyond the arc. That's a really strong offensive game. They moved the ball well. Blake passed very, very well. It was just about the defense. It was the defense. They have a stronger defensive game. They could have won.
You should win every game that you score 117 points. But that's the negative way to look at it tonight. But on the other hand, they scored 117 points. That's a positive. We could. The defense is just it is what it is. But there are teams that don't score that much, and they would love to get up and down like the Clippers do. So sure, that's good. That's good. They're not having any trouble scoring.
Yes, I'm actually looking up the Clippers' advanced box score right now. Here we go. Yeah, the Clippers' offensive rating tonight was 120.7. So, I mean, that's phenomenal. To put that in perspective, the Mavs lead the league in points per 100 possessions right now, and they're at like a little over 113. So, almost 121 is phenomenal. San Antonio's was like unrealistic. It was video game like. It was almost 131. So that'll do it. You allow a team to score 131 points per 100 possessions, and you're probably not going to win that game. And that's what happens when a team shoots 60-some% from the field and 50-some% from three. That hurts you. I do want to talk about something you mentioned. Maybe it's an issue with personnel. Maybe it's an issue with scheme. Whatever it is, maybe it's something in between. Let's talk about the personnel thing, because that's something that, we've been, not just us, a lot of people have been talking about all year. Do they lack a third wing defender, whatever it is? Well, today there's some intrigue because earlier today, the Detroit Pistons waived Josh Smith. They used the stretch provision to do it, which means that they have to pay him all $26 million on his deal. But against the salary cap, now that's spread out. Those $26 million are spread out over 5 years, so he's owed a little bit more than $5 million over, or I should say his cap counts against the cap a little more than $5 million a year. But the Clippers can offer him a minimum contract, and he'll still be making his $13 million over the next 2 years. The Clippers are said to be interested. There have been multiple reports that Houston is the leading candidate for him and can offer him the biannual exception, which is the contract Jordan Farmar has, a little bit more than $2 million. And there's another team. Oh, the Kings, right. Of course, the Kings are interested in him. The Kings, where Vivek says he wants to play like the Spurs, but he also wants to get Josh Smith.
Don't forget the Dallas Mavericks.
Yes, and the Mavericks. I knew it was
because Rondo and he are friends. So
right, and Houston makes sense because he and Dwight are friends because they're both Atlanta guys growing up in Atlanta, and
Dallas makes sense because they need presumably a paint defender. It doesn't make sense because he couldn't start for that team, and that seems like an issue.
Yeah, he definitely could not start on that team. But apparently he's told his agent he only wants to sign with a team that's a contender. So if he only wants to sign with a team that's a contender, then he has to realize. I mean, I think anyone who says I want to sign with a team that's a contender, you have to realize you're probably marginalizing your playing time. So, I think he's got to realize that's minutes. So got to be some sort of sacrifice if he only wants to sign with a team that can potentially win a championship, because that's true for pretty much anybody not named like LeBron James or Kevin Durant. So let's talk about Josh Smith with the Clippers. They're a team. One of the 4 teams that's in there. I've kind of talked myself into it. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of Josh Smith, and it's pretty much all legitimate. But I've kind of talked myself into it as a necessary signing. What do you think?
Well, look, if the theory in the past 2 years has been that come playoff time, teams are going to make Matt Barnes beat them, so to speak, like. They're going to crowd Blake Griffin. They're going to double team Chris Paul in the pick and roll. They're going to really put lengthy defenders on Paul. And the end result is that the ball is going to be in Matt Barnes' hands a lot of time. He's going to be the guy with space and going to have to make decisions. And he's going to be the offensive player that the Clippers are going to rely on to score. So let him. If he beats us, so be it. Has been the kind of strategy for some teams, or at least a talking point. Josh Smith doesn't really address that issue from a shooting perspective. He's a worse shooter than Matt Barnes, but he's better at about everything else. And while we know that Josh Smith has been kind of at his worst when he's been kind of a 3 rather than a 4. On this Clipper team, the offense is so good that you can kind of get away with it. And Smith is a great ball handler and a great passer for his size, and he could be the thing that they need, to shore up this wing defense. He's got length, he's got speed. He might be less explosive than he once was, but come on, this guy is an athlete, and he's pretty impressive, and he's a rim protector. He could be somebody that could really disrupt what other teams do against him, and the Clippers need someone to guard the big, lengthy wing players on these other playoff contenders. So it's intriguing in that way. And Fred, you were talking before about lineup-wise. It's not as simple as starter versus bench. Like, the Clippers could do interesting things with him.
Yeah, I mean, you could have Smith be. If you get him, you probably have to start him because you're not going to start Matt Barnes over him. Even if you're worried about Josh Smith being a 3, which is a legit worry because it did not at all work in Detroit, and he totally clogs up the floor because he's not a 3-point shooter, and guys will help off of him for sure. But the thing is, if you have a guy help off him, you kick out to him, he can drive, he can handle, like you said. He's earned a reputation of being selfish. He's not so much selfish as a shooter as he is that he takes bad shots. If that makes sense at all. Like, he's a willing passer. If guys are open, he will pass, and he's actually a very good passer, especially when he's a power forward. He's a very good passing power forward. He just takes bad shots. The shots that he chooses to take are not optimal ones when he could probably get better ones using his athleticism and actual skill. He's very skilled. And he's having a bad year statistically, finishing around the rim, and his field goal percentage and that stuff are terrible. But that Pistons offense leaves absolutely nothing to be desired. I think you can put a lot of stock into that. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the lineups, you can start him at the 3. He can be your first guy out of the game. He can come out at the 6-minute marker. Barnes can come in, play from 6 minutes on. And then, like we were talking about before the show, all of a sudden he comes back in at the start of the second quarter as your backup 4.
Yeah, or he relieves Griffin. Yeah, or he relieves Griffin or Jordan at the end of the first, even.
He works nicely as a tandem with Hawes as well. If Hawes can come back healthy, Hawes is your pop guy. Smith can roll. Smith can be around the rim. He works as a nice tandem defensively with him because, like you said, he's a rim protector. He's a defender. Now, all of a sudden, that's not Hawes' responsibility nearly as much as when he's playing next to Glenn Davis, who's never going to protect the rim. He's still, he's not as explosive as he was in Atlanta. But when he was in Atlanta, he was one of the absolute top-tier A-guys, athletes in the league. He's not one of the absolute top-tier athletes in the league. He's still a very, very good athlete, though, and he's still a capable defender. Even if his defense has slipped in Detroit, a lot of it is effort. I mean, he's making or I should say he's not making plays, which he made in Atlanta, and they're effort plays. They're just him looking at a guy in the corner and just not closing out on him because he chooses not to close out on him. That kind of stuff can change when all of a sudden you get a guy who says, I want to go to a contender, which shows some desire of competition. That kind of stuff can change when you go from whatever Detroit is, 5-23 to contending team.
To that point, a couple things. First, Smith doesn't have a reputation for being a bad locker room guy.
Right.
Guys like playing with him. That's not an issue. So I've heard that mentioned a couple times today, and I don't think that's accurate. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but people like playing with him, as far as I know, generally.
I think people like him personally. I don't know.
Personally. Okay, that's what I meant. Well, I've heard people raising concerns about locker room, and I just don't think that's an issue with him. I think people genuinely like him. Second thing. A couple names I want to bring up. Boris Diaw, Zach Randolph, Rudy Gay. These are guys who were written off. They had their obituaries written in the NBA, who were effectively, certainly in the case of Zebo and Rudy Gay, were salary dumped more than once. And now they're flourishing. Diaw, if a guy hasn't suffered a kind of career-ending injury and isn't just too old or isn't dealing with off-court issues, he's not. We shouldn't write them off just because he was in a terrible situation with a bad team that was going nowhere. It matters whether what the situation is, what the chemistry is, how things are working. Josh Smith is salvageable, despite his bad shooting and his bad tendencies. I mean, he was an impact player before. I think there's still time for him to be an impact player in the league. There's no guarantee. Like, he could come to LA and hoist bad shots and not try on defense. But, at a veteran's minimum deal, he seems kind of worth it.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of my buddies texted me today, who's a huge basketball fan, and I thought he put it really well. He said, Josh Smith just went from one of the least desirable contracts in the league to one of the most wanted assets in the league by contenders.
Yeah, totally.
And in like 5 minutes. And I was like, yeah, wow. Like, that's a really funny way to put it, but, like, that's totally true. Yeah, I think he's going to be – look, I don't know if he's going to regain. Like, 2012-13, like, he had a legitimate case. He's never been an all-star before, which is kind of weird. You'd think he would have been. But he had a legitimate case to be an all-star that year. He had the year when he just stopped shooting threes, that one really weird year, which I think there should be a 30 for 30 on it. Yeah, I would be the only person that would watch it, but I would love it. Because there's one random year of Josh Smith's career. Everyone says he takes too many threes. What year is it? 2009-10. Josh Smith stopped taking threes. He took 7 threes all season. And it looked like Josh Smith has changed his career. He was over 50% from the field. He had a great year. It was his best year. And then the next year he just started taking threes again. And
the next year they could do a 30 for 300.
What do you say?
The next year they could do a 30 for 300 for his shooting percentage.
30 for 300. That's good. But he started doing it again. I don't know why. I've always wondered why the heck that happened. But Josh Smith, if you can somehow get him to stop shooting threes, which you probably can't, because there have been so many coaches who have tried and been unable to do it. But the ball's not going to be in his hands as much wherever he goes. Houston, Clippers, Dallas. Dallas has Rondo and Dirk and Channing and those guys who have to get the ball, and then Channing and Chandler Parsons. I'm so confused by the Tyson Chandler Parsons thing that I just get thrown off thinking about the Chandlers, and then I end up saying Channing. The Clippers have a bunch of guys, and it's going to be a different situation than it was in Detroit, or even Atlanta, where he could just chuck up. So on top of that, he feels like he's been around forever. He's only 29. He's only 29 years old. Just turned 29 too. So I think it's worth it. It's minimum salary risk.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you don't think the Clippers can win a championship now, and your mentality for this roster is, if they don't win a championship, then this season was kind of a failure. And I don't like that mentality most of the time. But you know what? At this point, the goal has got to be winning a championship, because this is pretty much what your roster is set at. And if you think that, or if Doc Rivers and the Clippers think this team is not good enough to win a championship as it stands, which I think a lot of people agree with, then it's worth the risk, because what's your worst case scenario? They're conceptually in the same situation they'd be had they not signed Smith anyway. So I'd be excited.
The only difference would be no Cunningham on their team.
Right. I mean, it's looking like they're bound for a first-round exit anyway, because I don't know in 7 games if they could beat Memphis or Golden State or San Antonio or Dallas, the way all those teams are playing. And, we're yet to see how Dallas will be with Rondo, but I'm not sure how they're going to beat. I don't even know if they beat Portland in a 7-game series right now. So it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk for most of those teams, I think, especially the Clippers.
Yeah.
All right, we're Josh Smithed out. I think that's going to do it for us tonight. Patrick, before we go, why don't you tell us what you're doing for your birthday tomorrow? It's actually 12:01 right now on the East Coast. So
hey!
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. What am I doing for my birthday? I'm going to hang out with my baby daughter and my wife and maybe go have a beer next door to my house. And, yeah, I'm going to hope for a miracle against these vicious birds of prey, the Hawks, that the Clippers are facing tomorrow.
Hawks are so good. There are 2 possible scenarios in that. The Clippers either think, oh, we got a practice run against San Antonio versus the Hawks because they play exactly the same way, or they think, oh, no, we have the Spurs again. This is awful. So who knows how it's going to go. The Hawks are actually at least on a back-to-back also, so that turns out okay, and they're coming off a close win as well. That's going to do it for us tonight. Clippers win this one 125-118 and fall to 19-9 on the season. As I just said, next up is the Hawks, and Mike Budenholzer's squad just beat the Mavericks by 3 tonight after holding a big lead. They were up like 20 earlier in the game, but they pulled out and closed it out on the road. No show tomorrow night after the Hawks game, but we will have a last call up shortly after the game ends, just like we did over the weekend. We'll be back with you on Christmas Day night, or however you refer to the night of the 25th. That's after the Warriors game. Good night, everyone.